What is one place you have visited that you never want to return to? Story 1. Nassau is an unappealing location filled with tourist traps. My wife got food poisoning from a fresh coconut. Story 2. Bakersfield, California. I grew up there and returned for nostalgia after over 20 years. It was a horrible experience. There were numerous individuals exhibiting disturbing behavior. I witnessed at least 3 fistfights within just 1 hour of arriving. Thankfully, I was in a rental car, as someone threw a beer bottle filled with urine and feces at it. I was informed that this could have been a distraction method to prompt me to pull over. Story 3. Cancun is primarily a tourist destination and may not be as enjoyable for travel. However, Tulum and Isla Mujeres are nearby and offer a better experience. Story 4. Gary, Indiana. I stopped there for gas after leaving Chicago. I served in the military, and that place gave me more anxiety than anywhere else I have ever been. Story 5. Djibouti, a country in Northeast Africa, has some of the most extreme poverty I have ever encountered, which is truly disheartening. Additionally, similar to many countries in Africa, extortion is prevalent among law enforcement. I experienced this firsthand when 2 officers pulled me over and attempted to extort money from me, but I refused to comply. Story 6. Hangzhou, China. In July, the temperature reached 43 degrees Celsius. The air was yellow about 10 meters off the ground, and there were too many people. I went there for work, and I will never go back. Story 7. IKEA. I couldn't find my way out. Every fire exit sign just pointed to another, and I ended up going in a square. The place is a death trap. Story 8. Sunny Beach, Bulgaria. Many people are trying to take advantage of you, and there are numerous children begging for money. I disliked the place. Additionally, I experienced stomach issues from the moment I stepped off the plane until 2 days after returning to England. I advise avoiding that part of Bulgaria. It truly is unpleasant. Story 9. Lagos, Nigeria is my absolute worst. It is dirty and dangerous, and people want to rob or cheat you wherever you go. Police, both real and fake, pull you over for random stops and demand bribes. Even customs at the airport demand bribes, even though all your belongings are in order. Story 10. Jakarta is often regarded as the textbook definition of urban hell. It's unfortunate because most of the people are friendly, and the city is surprisingly safe in terms of crime, although the driving is terrifying. However, the traffic and pollution are unlike anything I have ever experienced. Story 11. Houston, Texas, is one large, unclean slab of concrete. It seems to draw its architectural inspiration from the Soviet Union. The people are friendly enough, but as someone from the South, I don't find that particularly remarkable. Story 12. India. The entire country. It is the filthiest, nastiest place I have ever been, and no square inch of it is redeemable. The apocalypse will come, and they won't even notice. Conditions might even improve for the birthplace of dysentery. Story 13. Vegas. I've heard it used to be very affordable because people often lose a lot while gambling, but now it's extremely expensive, and I still lose quite a bit. It's all cigarette smoke, escorts, and overpriced items. Story 14. Bismarck, North Dakota. My wife and I were road tripping to Yellowstone and had been driving for about 16 hours straight on day 3. We were completely exhausted. It was 10 at night, and we needed to get some sleep. The rest of the state seemed unwelcoming, so we figured the capital was probably the safest choice. We pulled up to a convenience store and saw 2 rundown minivans with 1 empty parking space between them. A group of people had the sliding doors open and were facing each other while drinking. There were at least 30 empty cans on the ground between them. Then we realized they were smoking meth or something out of a pipe that smelled like chemicals. We quickly jumped back into our car and drove to the other end of the parking lot in search of a safe hotel. Suddenly, we heard the crunching of cans, and one of the vans drove toward us. We started aimlessly driving, unable to think of anything else but to search for the closest police station and head straight there. To our surprise, the station was only a couple of minutes away. When we pulled up, there was an officer smoking a cigarette outside. We parked next to him, and I jumped out, calling for help while pointing at the van, which had pulled up to about 10 feet away from us. Then the driver of the van yelled, "That's not fair. You cheated." The officer yelled back, "Go home, Travis. I'm too tired for this today." The guy just drove off, and the officer acted as if it were a minor annoyance. He then told us about a safe hotel and said to return if we had another problem or to call, simply stating, "You know the number?" before walking inside. Bismarck, North Dakota was not what we expected. Story 15. I got scabies while in the Florida Keys. The place reminded me of strip malls with unappealing beaches. Considering the price, Florida as a whole is not worth it. Why not just go to the Caribbean instead? You get the same priced vacations, friendlier locals, and stronger drinks. Story 16. I will be more specific than others who mentioned India by referring to New Delhi. The smog was an absolute disgrace, and I could feel my life expectancy shortening with each passing hour I spent there. Story 17. Alice Springs. I went there to do an awards show in the casino, and we had 4 shipping containers full of equipment that were dropped off in the car park. It was about a 400-meter push-up a 3-degree incline across black bitumen to the venue loading doors, and at 9 a.m. it was already 40 degrees Celsius. Luckily, we had a forklift to help, but we still had to unload the shipping containers by hand, and by the time we finished at about 10:30 a.m., it was 48 degrees Celsius. We got everything inside to the comfortably air-conditioned venue and started setting up. At about 3 p.m., I stepped outside for a cigarette, and in the time it took me to smoke it, the temperature plummeted from 48 degrees to 12 degrees, and a massive storm swept through. It was absolutely torrential rain. The Todd River, which runs through the center of Alice Springs, flash flooded. 3 people who were sleeping off their lunchtime drinks in the normally dry river died. They say that if you see the Todd River flowing 3 times in your life, you're considered to be a local. I've seen it once, and I will never risk going back to see it flowing again, because there's no way I ever want to be considered a local of that place. Story 18. I got a couple of places. Story time. I'm from West Virginia, and I know it's rural in some areas. I've always known this. Anyway, I grew up in one of the bigger cities in West Virginia, and I did live in these apartments in the country, but there were still lights and such. When I was 13, my dad decided to take me camping with his friend and her family at their house in Middlebourne, West Virginia. He and my mom separated when I was 1. We packed things we would need for the weekend, and we were on our way to Middlebourne. Once we reached West Union, we stopped at a Family Dollar, and I was told if I wanted anything for the weekend, this was the last store. Mind you, we weren't even in Tyler County, where Middlebourne is, but next door in Doddridge. We arrived at this small house. We walked in, and the family lived there. There was no door on the bathroom, and it was really small. Well, they didn't have room, so we had to set up tents outside. Then came the darkness. I tell you, I've never seen anywhere outside get so dark. We were sleeping by the main road, and we heard the sound of 18-wheelers on their way to Ohio. It was like being in a horror movie. My dad and I had to do all this hard work for them and were only fed once a day. By the time Sunday came, I was so glad to get out of there and be back in my hometown. I don't like camping, and I definitely won't be going back to Middlebourne. Second story. I love to travel around the state, and in general, I've been to 28 out of 55 counties here. I wanted to see what it was like in Wetzel County. I have a thing for getting the county signs and taking a photo of the county to make a book out of it. Anyway, I was going to go from Lumberport, West Virginia to Smithfield, West Virginia, where my great-grandfather was born. According to Google Maps, it said I'd be there in 17 minutes. I thought, okay, this will be quick and easy. I thought wrong. 45 minutes later, I was still in Harrison County, on this winding road. I came up this crooked hill, and it looked like it turned at a 90-degree angle over these train tracks. It would be easy to get your car stuck if it's low to the ground. Anyway, I finally made it to Wetzel County. A few minutes later, I came across this little community called Folsom. It looked like a giant field with all these houses lined up on both sides and a strange-looking church in the middle. It reminded me of a cult. I was ready for the elder mother and the highest to come out, So I said to myself, the next business I find, I'm getting out of here. I turned around and was back where I started in Harrison County in about 20 minutes. I'm not going back there either. Story 19, Egypt. I haven't heard a single person visit there and want to return. I would like to take my son to see the pyramids, as I think that's worth doing, but it will be despite the fact that they are in Egypt, not because of it. Blackpool is also disappointing and is probably the worst town I've visited, other than Cairo. Story 20. India faces significant challenges, including sanitation issues in some areas. Cultural practices vary widely, and some communities hold unique beliefs related to hygiene and spirituality. However, there is ongoing effort and progress towards improving living conditions and public health throughout the country. Story 21. Kuta, located on the island of Bali in Indonesia, is in a state of disrepair. During my visit, palm trees along the beach were being removed with a bulldozer to make way for new shops and a mall. Visitors are frequently approached by vendors trying to sell items, and they will only stop if you fully leave the area. Additionally, there is a risk of encountering people who may attempt to drug you if you go into certain bars. This was easily the most disappointing place I have ever visited. Story 22. I went with my friend to visit his cousin in Colombia. It was a terrible decision. I got robbed and shot. I ran away and only noticed the blood when I reached the motel. Story 23. Iraq and Kuwait are characterized by harsh desert conditions that are dusty, hot, and inhospitable. The local culture often involves women dressing conservatively, and there are perceptions of distrust towards men. Story 24. I stepped out of the train station and immediately saw a person defecating on the sidewalk. The entire city smelled unpleasant. Most people were unfriendly, except for the elderly lady who held my arm while crossing the street. I would be fine with never returning. Story 25. Egypt has significant issues, including poverty and crime. France has been openly critical of America and has often displayed rudeness. During my time on shore patrol, I experienced numerous instances of disrespect, such as being insulted and receiving poor service. While I support European unity, my feelings toward France have soured over time, particularly since the 1990s. Story 26. South Bend, Indiana, is where Notre Dame is located. The area has significant poverty, yet there is a beautiful university in the middle of it. Story 27. I went to Charlotte last year. It was nice, but there was a situation I encountered while walking around, and a guy seemed a little unhinged. Maybe it was a one-time event. He approached me and said, "Don't worry, you'd be dead if I wanted you dead." Meanwhile, I grew up on the streets of Brooklyn, New York. Story 28. New York City. As soon as I got off the subway into the city, I wanted to leave. I did a couple of things there and saw some nice street art, but I will pass on going back. The rest of New York State was beautiful, though. Story 29. Scranton, Pennsylvania. My girlfriend and I thought it was amusing since we were moving across the country to stop there. Let me tell you, it was quite remote. There was only one street that had any activity. It featured the world's worst and most pretentious ramen shop I have ever visited, situated next to an empty parking lot and an art gallery. Story 30. Los Angeles City has little to recommend. I loved California, especially the countryside and San Francisco. However, I found Los Angeles to be disappointing. I was only there for a few days, so there may be great venues I missed. The city itself felt dirty, with many homeless people, a heavy reliance on cars, unpleasant beaches, and poor air quality. Story 31. Paris felt unremarkable. It resembled any other major city globally, with a culture that was distinct enough to be intriguing yet still somewhat frustrating. Story 32. Kuta Beach in Bali is a disappointing place, with litter everywhere. The beach is unclean for swimming and attracts unruly behavior. Everything is overpriced and overrated, especially considering its location in Indonesia, which has been inflated by Australian and English tourists. Story 33. Winnipeg. Why was it built in the first place? Winters are harsh enough to make most of Canada seem tame, with summers thick with mosquitoes, dangerous streets, crime, and racial tensions. There is also a lack of activities. Story 34. The job center. Signing on for benefits is degrading. You sit around and fill out a form. A staff member informs you that you filled out your form incorrectly. You make the necessary changes, but another staff member disagrees. In the background, someone with questionable behavior argues with the staff and is removed by security. It's 10 a.m. You are sent to training on job searching. The trainer informs you that there are no jobs, but we must report that we attended training. During the session, people share stories about how they worked for 30 years, were let go, and now don't know what to do. The job center staff appear indifferent. You line up for your bus fare home, wait, and receive a handful of loose change, amounting to £2.15 in 8 coins. Story 35. My parents' grave. I love and miss them both, but I don't need to visit the cemetery to mourn them. I have only visited the site for their burials. Story 36. Delaware had little to offer. It was mainly car washes and drive-through liquor stores. Story 37. Roosendal in the Netherlands is a place I passed through by train years ago. On one occasion, we were delayed because someone attacked a man with an axe at the train station. On another occasion, my friend was robbed. Truly felt like a town full of criminals. Story 38. Boracay in the Philippines is not worth visiting. Many vendors, public transport services, and restaurants engage in dishonest practices. As a local, I can tell you that it is even more challenging for foreigners. The beach is average, and there are plenty of better beaches in the Philippines. Additionally, the area is overcrowded. Story 39. My stepfather was a connoisseur of meth. This meant we would frequently go to various houses so he could buy or sell. One such house had several rifles on the wall, which is normal for Tennessee. However, the milk crate of dynamite sticks was unusual. The old toothless man said they were for dynamite fishing. Story 40. Santa Teresita, Argentina. I have visited many places in this beautiful country, but Santa Teresita is the only place I actively wanted to leave. Story 41. Birmingham, England. It was sketchy when I went. Now that the local council has gone bankrupt, I can only assume it will turn fully chaotic. Story 42. Tangier, Morocco is a beautiful city. However, it can be overwhelming due to aggressive bargaining and persistent begging from some individuals. Although it is a unique experience, I felt the need to stand my ground when someone got too close. Story 43. London is dirty, and the people are rude. It is second on my list of places to never visit again, right after Disney World. Story 44. Memphis, Tennessee. The last time I visited, it was unpleasant. I remember going as a child in the early 2010s, and it was enjoyable, but I might have had a nostalgic perspective. Story 45. Coventry is a difficult place, and the same goes for Birmingham. When the Luftwaffe bombed Coventry, they replaced the buildings with nothing more offensive than rubble. It took British architects to transform it into what it is today. The 1950s and 1960s trend of using concrete everywhere is visually unappealing and unhygienic, as concrete traps all the dirt. Story 46. Alissa, France. There is not much to see or do there, and there is not a great selection of restaurants either. Story 47. Barstow, California. I had to make an unscheduled stop here when our car's air conditioning went out while passing through Death Valley. The area mainly consists of auto repair shops, all of which operate on a cash-only basis, a couple of banks for cash withdrawal to cover repairs, liquor stores, and other less savory establishments. Story 48. One of my friends locked me in a room for half an hour and questioned me about everything he does, how much he studies, if he talks to girls, and if he skips classes. I knew his family was very strict, but that experience was on another level. Even though I was treated well as a guest, I don't want to go back to that uncomfortable place where it felt like we were being watched every second. He had warned me that I wouldn't like it there, and as soon as I got out, he mocked me by asking if I would like to visit his house again. As he expected, I said, "Oh no!" Story 49. Brampton, Ontario. Unfortunately, It will be a few years until I no longer have to go there again due to my children. As soon as I enter that city, I become instantly enraged. Story 50, Fairmont, West Virginia. I'm not sure it was such a bad place, but I was certainly in a bad situation when I lived there for a year. That said, it could have been a penthouse suite in paradise, and my ex would have made it a nightmare. Story 51, Nassau, Bahamas. I would go back to jail before I would return there. It is beautiful to look at but very sketchy. Story 52. Bluff is located at the southern tip of the South Island of New Zealand, which is where things come to an end. Story 53. So many decades ago, we were traveling around the Great Lakes when my mother miscalculated the distance, and we ended up stopping in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was a friendly town, and we made the most of it. However, the beach was full of insects. The motel flooring where we children were sleeping had a terrible smell. There were only 2 television channels, one of which was boring sports, and there was no air conditioning. Finally, after falling asleep, we were disturbed by a train passing through. We were frustrated to discover that civilization had been within driving range, possibly Ottawa, before heading to Toronto. Today, I would probably enjoy the small town more, but as a teenager, it was quite an experience. Story 54, Belize City, Belize. That experience was intense, and I have worked in Southeast Los Angeles, so I am no stranger to challenging situations. Story 55, Salzburg, Austria. I'm not saying it wasn't pretty. It was, for sure. But I'm from British Columbia, Canada. The natural scenery and mountains were virtually indistinguishable from those I've lived near my entire life, so I was not particularly impressed. I reckon someone who has never seen many landscapes like these would definitely find them absolutely impressive. As for the city itself, I was naively expecting something resembling the quaint and quintessential Austrian experience of the 1930s, reminiscent of The Sound of Music. There was an old town area that looked like that, but it was so crowded and just didn't feel charming. It was small and bustling, feeling a bit disingenuous. It felt like they were really catering to tourists, which is common in many European tourist spots. Felt like a tourist trap. But I am a tourist, so what can I say? Seeing some of the locations from the film was a letdown because of all the people taking pictures, and most of them didn't look the same as they did in the movie anyway. Of course, it has been over 50 years since. The rest of the city was modern. Where I was staying across the river was not pleasant. Construction everywhere, poor immigrants who would harass you outside the train station, and trash scattered about. It was disheartening. The locals were incredibly rude and short with me once they heard me speak English. Nobody helped and nobody was kind. It also rained most of the time I was there. That's okay. I expect that of Austria, but it was disappointing. My hotel was not nice and was completely misrepresented on the website, which also left a bad taste in my mouth when I reflect on this part of my trip. Additionally, Austrian food just isn't my thing. I don't eat pork, sausages, or sauerkraut, just not for me. Everything about it doesn't appeal to me after visiting, and I know I don't need to go back. If you go there expecting it to be like The Sound of Music, you will be disappointed. That's my own fault, I suppose. I'm sure my 3 short days there do not reflect the city as a whole. I'm sure others have wonderful experiences there, and it could be that I simply didn't see or feel what they did, but I just don't care to return. Places are multifaceted, complex, and different for each person's experience, and I recognize that one short trip does not represent a place as a whole. That said, almost every other European city I visited lived up to my standards or impressed me even more than I expected. Vienna was gorgeous. Prague was fantastic. I was shocked by how much I loved it and even extended my stay there by 5 days. Dubrovnik in Croatia was incomparably beautiful and amazing. So you win some, you lose some. Story 56. Puerto Vallarta is hot, unpleasant, and crowded with people eager to sell you items. My husband contracted a parasite there, which made for a challenging experience. Story 57. Paris, France. I would visit the rest of the country as I hear it is quite different, but Paris is an overrated city. Go if you must see the Louvre and major sites like that, but spending much time in the city is unpleasant. I had a low-grade headache the whole time I was there from the diesel exhaust. Story 58. India. Besides visiting holy places, I have no desire to return to my country. Story 59. Georgia, the entire state, has a distinct smell reminiscent of a swamp, and it feels as if the craziness from Florida is spreading into it. Story 60. Branson, Missouri. Yes, it is pretty, but it is the cheesiest place I have ever been. Dolly Parton's Stampede. Story 61. Sarnia. I visited one of my best friends there 2 years ago. I thought fake London, where I live, was awful to walk in. Sarnia is worse with its narrow sidewalks and sprawl. Story 62. The London Eye experience is overpriced. The view is not impressive and the surrounding area is overly touristy, making me feel as though I was standing on Navy Pier in Chicago, but in all the worst ways. Story 63. Greece. I don't understand how its economy can rely on tourism. I experienced poor food and service during my visit in 1999. Story 64. BrandSmart USA was the most unsettling shopping experience of my life. The inside of the building was a 3-story structure with an open atrium in the middle, spanning all 3 floors, allowing visibility between levels into each department. Almost nobody was shopping there except us, and the sales staff were smiling constantly, observing us from each floor. The atmosphere was extremely creepy. Story 65. New York was overwhelming for me. I wasn't there long, but it felt too big, and I became anxious in the sea of people that seemed to be everywhere. I was also scared when I saw a large billboard showing a picture of someone labeled as a wanted murderer. The city appeared quite dirty as well. Story 66. New Orleans is lively during nighttime celebrations. I visited this past New Year's, and the atmosphere was overwhelming. The streets were crowded, making it difficult to walk. There was a strong smell due to litter and waste, with abandoned items scattered about and many intoxicated individuals. It was more than I could handle, but the fireworks by the river were beautiful. The following day, the city was much calmer. Professional cleaners had come through, and it looked normal again. I enjoyed my time much more that day. Story 67. Morocco was better when I visited with friends than when I went with my wife. Scranton, Pennsylvania is a struggling town, which is unfortunate. Story 68. The Blue Lagoon in Malta has received a lot of hype on various sites, but it is not as impressive as expected. There are many people, and you can find more beautiful beaches in Malta itself. Story 69. Honestly, New York City is expensive and much of the city is quite dirty. I was astounded by how trashy and terrible Times Square is. I have friends who live there, so I will be back, but I definitely need to find something enjoyable during my next visit. Story 70. It wasn't a great time in Fallujah in 2003. I hear it's better now, and I'm happy to hear that, but I think I'll stay away. Story 71. New York City. I am not a huge fan of cities, but I figured it would be worth visiting at least once. My favorite place ended up being Central Park, while I found the rest of the city to be quite unpleasant. Story 72. Managua, especially downtown, is one of the sketchiest cities I have ever spent time in. I have spent a fair amount of years traveling around sketchy places all over the globe. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.